Hi, welcome to the 3D drawing series. This is lesson 3 and today we're going to cover the perspective measurements. Now there are different techniques, so it's best to have a look probably 2 or 3 times at this particular one. So this is a typical 1-point perspective drawing. And obviously you can see the back wall very clearly, and you can see the return walls, but the measurements in most cases are just guesswork. Probably not the best way of doing it. Those that have been doing it for years do it very, very well and quickly, but there is a simple technique that the beginner can master quite easily. First of all, you need your scale plan. As with all of these exercises, you should always start with a scale plan and try to stick to 120. Now, perspective drawings, which are the ones that we're talking about, have a different technique for each drawing, but the measurements, return wall measurements, are very, very similar. Now, the first perspective drawing we're going to be looking at is the single 1-point perspective. Quite popular. It may be the one that a lot of people will learn, maybe nothing else. It does a very good job on simple L shapes, simple U shapes, and just even for general perspective. So the whole point of the 1-point perspective drawing, you've got one vanishing point in the middle of the back wall where all the measurements are projected from. Now, if you're doing a 1-point, an elevation can be very helpful. The back wall elevation will always be in scale. So if you start from a scale drawing, then it becomes very, very simple to project the return walls. The 2-point technique is a little bit more complicated because you've got just one point in that room, which is the back corner. So you see where the sink is? Just a crease in the corner. That's your back corner of the wall. That's the only thing that will be in scale on that particular technique. We can see vanishing points in daily observations. We're looking down a road and you can see that that road is getting narrower as it goes into the distance. That's perspective. One of the simplest ways to relate it is to a railway track. So here we're looking at a sort of graphic representation of a railway track, starting from the front wall, going right back into infinity, if you like, and you can see that those measurements, which are all supposed to be the same, vary and get smaller as you get towards 0. This is actually a real railway track, exactly the same thing, and although the tyres are perhaps not in great condition, you can see that they're getting narrower and narrower as you get further down the track. Now here we're looking at various drawings. First of all, front elevation. As we know, there's no depth to it. It's a 1D drawing and everything is in scale. Isometric and axonometric is a drawing that's simply drawn with parallel lines using your set square. So in the case of your isometric, you're using your 60-30 set square. In the case of your axonometric, you're using 45 set square. Now, an elevation oblique is a little bit confusing, I suppose. It really is almost an axonometric drawing. A plan oblique is a sort of a bird's eye, but a plan oblique, which is more like, again, an axonometric or an isometric drawing, doesn't have true perspective scale. So that's in scale, doesn't have perspective scale. So the main one that we're looking at today is the 1-point perspective, and that of course does have the perspective scale. As you can see, on the steps of that mausoleum or whatever it is, they do get narrower as you go back. Now your 3-point perspective is a little bit like a 2-point, but it comes with an additional tilt to give you that extra. The tilt is very, very similar to a bird's eye, so that very few people will use that. Most people will use obviously the axonometric, the isometric, but in perspective they will use the 1-point, the 2-point, and the bird's eye once they're used to it. As we said before, always use the drawing board. Nice, neat, tidy job. You don't have to guess with it. It produces the measurements for you, produces the vertical lines exactly correct, produces the horizontal lines exactly correct, produces the angle lines, in this case shows a 45 set square, or of course you use your 60-30. But it's no good for the return wall measurements, the actual perspective measurements. So this is the first method that you can use, finding the return measurements, okay? So that if you've got a scale plan, which we've got a very simple representation here, we then choose not the vanishing point. The VP in this particular drawing refers to the viewing point. So this is just the viewing point, just to get the return wall measurements. So we're looking at this return wall. As you can see, we've got maybe a corner unit, maybe another unit, and maybe a 300mm unit from that. So of course the depth of the worktop is 600mm, which we'll need anyway. So if we extend the floor line, that's just the floor line of the plan, and use the vanishing point, which needs to be as far away as you can possibly get, even off the board if necessary, and then we sight up the 600mm, project that onto the back wall, make a mark. Then the next unit will be perhaps 400, again project that, make a mark. Then the next unit will be 500, again project that. Obviously the problem here is we're starting to lose the back wall, so you do need to make sure you leave yourself enough space. So that's one method. The second method is probably a little bit friendlier, because we're going to use the perspective floor, so that we've got the plan, the scale plan, but we're going to use the vanishing point lining through to the end of the wall, and that's going to be the return wall. That's the floor line. So we do the same thing, but we project the measurements onto the return wall in perspective. The simplest method is to use a perspective ruler. Now here you've got one which you can copy and put it on a bit of cardboard or whatever, and you've got yourself a perspective ruler. Remember, all the measurements are cumulative, so you add 500, and then if you've got another 300 you go to 800, then if you've got another say 500 you go to 1300. So you don't add the 5 and then move it along, add the 3, then move it along, add the 5. You have to mark the measurements off cumulatively. Now the alternative method is almost like a perspective ruler, but it involves starting with the vanishing point, then having a horizon line. Now normally the horizon line will probably be the worktop line, and then you need two further lines. One is probably going to be the floor line, and the other one will be a line which must be equal to the floor line. So assuming you've got your horizon line, which is say the worktop line, then you use your floor line, and then you use 900mm up from the floor line to get yourself the top line. So you're creating a triangle. Okay, so as we said, locate your vanishing point, draw the horizon line, a convenient measurement above and below, which must be equal, and the end of the room is the best way to produce the vertical line. Step 2, this is purely arbitrary. You just simply guess at how far the first measurement's going to be to represent your chosen measurement. Now in this case we're say using a 500mm, but it's going to relate to what's convenient for the board, what space you've got on the board, whether you've got an A4 board, an A3 board, or even a full-size drawing board or whatever. So when we get the first division arbitrarily marked out, we draw a vertical line, and you can see that vertical line intersects the horizon line exactly in the center. Then we go, starting from the top left corner, lining up with the intersect of that first division, we then hit the floor line or the bottom line, and that gives us the next division. So there we draw a vertical line. So we've now got two divisions, both representing 500mm, but as you can see, we can see the diminishing of the lines in the perspective. And then keep on going, as many as you need. Keep on going with exactly the same method. Top of the division, intersect of the next division, hit the floor for the following division, vertical line, start again, etc. So keep on going, and of course this could be your ruler. So if you're using an A3 board, you might go for a big ruler. You're using an A4 board, you could go for a small ruler. Or if you're drawing large interiors like a hall, you might want to have a different kind of scale. Or if you're doing outdoor work, then you could even start with meter divisions and stuff like that. So get used to it, get used to the perspective ruler, and what you'll find is as you go along you'll get more and more used to using return wall measurements, and then at the very worst, maybe a couple, 3 months down the line, you'll measure big divisions like a meter, and then you'll be able to do the intermediate divisions purely by getting used to the look of it. Now next time we're going to go for the first installment of the 1-point perspective. Okay, some people used to use a grid, as you can see in the top right hand side. Very cumbersome, totally inflexible, and frankly it's not really a great thing to get to use or even bother with. Left hand of this particular slide, you can see how we've transformed that little simple elevation we had at the front of this lesson into a 3D 1-point very, very simply, very quickly. And bottom right you can see your 60-30 set square, your 45-degree set square, and that is it till the next time, folks.